The message that arrived at Earth's orbit was unlike anything humanity had ever received. Not a threat wrapped in diplomatic language, not a demand hidden behind cultural pleasantries. This was pure, undisguised desperation coming from the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy. The Galactic Council, an organization that had conquered worlds without breaking a sweat, that had bent entire star systems to their will, was begging. Not demanding. Not commanding. Begging. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the UES Prometheus, Earth's first true military vessel, and read the transmission one more time. The words burned into her mind like a brand: retreat from Earth now. Abandon your homeworld. Leave while you still can. This is not a request. This is a mercy we extend to a species we once respected. A mercy. They were calling it mercy. But mercy, Sarah understood, was something only those who could afford to be weak extended to others. Mercy came from a position of absolute strength. And if the Galactic Council was offering mercy to humanity, it meant only one thing: they were terrified of what would happen if humans refused. This was the moment that would change everything. This was the moment Earth would learn what it truly meant to be human. Commander Sarah Chen had always been the kind of leader who made decisions in the space between heartbeats. Raised in the gravity wells of Mars colonies, trained in the razor-thin margins of survival where atmosphere itself was a resource measured in minutes, she had learned that hesitation was the only true enemy. But, as she stood before the United Earth Government Council, reading the official Galactic Council message projected on every screen in the chamber, she realized that some decisions transcended mere urgency. Some decisions would echo through human history for generations yet unborn. "They're serious," she said quietly, her voice carrying the strange clarity that came only in moments of absolute crisis. "Every scanning array we have is showing incoming vessels. The computational estimates from our AI networks suggest 3 separate fleets, each containing more firepower than everything Earth has ever built." The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of fear, denial, and desperate hope. The German delegate, Minister Hans Kohler, was already composing another message. The Indian representative, Dr. Priya Kapoor, was running calculations on relocation parameters. The American secretary was attempting to contact the United Nations Security Council, as if that ancient body held any relevance against beings who could reshape stars. Only one person sat in silence. Director Ahmed Hassan, the head of Earth's space operations, simply nodded slowly. He had been expecting this. He was one of the few humans who truly understood what lay beyond Earth's protective atmosphere. "The evacuation we've been preparing?" Sarah asked him directly. "Insufficient," Ahmed replied without looking up. "We can save maybe 15% of Earth's population. 50 million people, if we're optimistic. And we'd need to strip every resource, every ship, every industrial capacity we have. Within 3 weeks, every human facility beyond Earth orbit would be abandoned. We'd become refugees." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting had been. Sarah moved to the observation window that looked down at Earth below them. The blue marble rotated slowly, completely unaware that its days might be numbered. 3 billion people lived down there. 3 billion futures that had nothing to do with the politics of beings who could command stars. She thought of her daughter, Chen Wei, living in the Hong Kong arcology. 10 years old, full of questions about why her mother spent all her time in space. Sarah had promised to take her to the lunar bases next year. Next year would never come. "Tell me everything," Sarah said, still staring at the planet. Not the diplomatic version. The actual situation. Ahmed Hassan stood and walked to join her. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and gray at the temples, and he carried the weight of knowledge that most humans would never bear. When he spoke, his words were carefully measured, each one chosen to convey maximum information. 18 months ago, we detected the first incursion near the Kepler station. A single scout vessel, Valerian in design. The Valorians are the Council's enforcement arm. They've been conquering and subjugating worlds for approximately 800 of our years. They are not invaders in the conventional sense. They are executioners. "And this scout?" Sarah prompted. one of our response teams intercepted it. We took no chances. We used everything we had. Kinetic weapons, electromagnetic pulses, particle accelerators. We destroyed it. The implications crystallized in Sarah's mind like ice forming in vacuum. That's not possible. The Valorians have shields technology that makes penetration nearly impossible. I've read the briefings from the first contact 15 years ago. Their single warship held off a combined fleet of Council species for 3 hours. That was 15 years ago, Ahmed said. That was when we were still learning how to build functional zero-gravity manufacturing facilities. That was before the Chunuong breakthrough in exotic matter stabilization. Before Dr. Okonkwo developed neural-assisted targeting systems that could predict complex movement patterns. Before humans figured out that if you build a weapon to kill something, you don't build it to their specifications. You build it to kill something they've never encountered before. Sarah understood immediately. We're weapons designers. Natural ones. The finest in the galaxy, Ahmed confirmed quietly. Which is why the Valorians have been systematically hunting every human researcher, every engineer, every scientist they can find. They've destroyed 17 research stations in the outer colonies. They've assassinated or captured every human who worked on advanced weapons systems. And they've been clear about their purpose: they don't want to conquer humanity. They want to eliminate us before we become what we're becoming. What are we becoming? Ahmed turned to face her fully. A threat to the established order. The Galactic Council has existed in relative stability for 5,000 years because a careful balance was maintained. Every species had clear limitations. Every civilization operated within boundaries. Then, humans showed up, and humans don't seem to understand limitations. He gestured toward the displays showing the approaching fleets. A year ago, the Valorians sent a diplomatic envoy to Earth. Professional courtesy, more or less. They made an observation during that visit. They noticed that every human facility they examined was designed with some kind of backup system. Redundancy at every level. They noted that our military doctrine emphasized adaptation and innovation rather than adherence to established protocols. They observed that we seemed to learn from every encounter, every failure, every setback. And they became afraid. So what changed? Sarah asked. Why the message now? Why not just attack? Because 2 months ago, Ahmed said, our team successfully tested a weapons system that proved theoretical physics we weren't supposed to have developed for another 100 years. The results were so devastating that when the Valorians analyzed the data, they realized something they had already lost. Not in a battle. Not in a war. They had already lost the race that matters most. The race of exponential technological advancement. Humans are accelerating faster than any species they've ever encountered. Given time, humans wouldn't just compete with the Galactic Council. We would replace them. The weight of that statement settled over Sarah like a physical force. It wasn't about invasion or territorial expansion. It wasn't about resources or ideology. It was about something far more fundamental. It was about the fundamental nature of human potential, finally recognized by those who understood such things. So the evacuation message is actually a mercy? Sarah said, understanding at last. Yes and no, Ahmed replied. The council is split on our disposition. Some want us eliminated entirely. Some want us enslaved, our potential channeled through their control. But the Valorians, and a few others, recognized something else. They realized that the best way to stop human advancement is not to destroy us, but to scatter us. If they can drive humanity away from Earth, away from our unified industrial base, away from the carefully engineered ecology that supports our civilization, we'll become refugees. Desperate. Divided. Our resources will go to survival, not innovation. Our greatest minds will be scattered across 1,000 worlds instead of united on one. Give it a few generations, and the mathematical advantage we currently hold disappears. Sarah looked back at Earth. The planet was rotating toward night, the Terminator line showing cities and lights and the accumulated weight of human history. Somewhere down there, her daughter was looking up at the stars and wondering if her mother was looking back down. Somewhere down there, 3 billion people were going about their lives, completely unaware that they were about to face a choice that should never have to be made. What do we do? Sarah asked. Ahmed smiled. It was a sad smile, tinged with something that might have been pride. That's the question, isn't it? That's the question that has always defined humanity. Not how do we survive? Every species can do that. But how do we survive with our principles intact? That's what separates us. The council chamber behind them had gone quiet. They were all listening. All of them understood that whatever happened in the next hours and days would determine the course of human civilization. Some would vote for evacuation. Some would argue for resistance. Some would simply break down under the weight of impossible choices. But Sarah Chen, raised in the low gravity of Mars, trained in the vacuum of space, had always been someone who moved toward danger rather than away from it. She had spent her entire life preparing for a moment when humanity would have to choose between safety and survival. Between comfort and the very essence of what made them human. Get me everything we have on Valerian military doctrine, she said. Every scrap of data from the encounters, every theoretical analysis, every engineering report. And get me a direct line to every human military installation. We need to know what we actually have to work with. Ahmed nodded once, understanding what she was really asking. Not just for information. For options. There's something else, Ahmed said. Something the message didn't contain. Something our intelligence networks picked up from council transmissions. They're not just afraid of our weapons development. They're afraid of something worse. Which is that if they attack Earth directly, if they force humanity into a corner and make it clear that the only options are extinction or victory, every human will become a researcher, an engineer, a weapons designer. We will turn our entire civilization into a single focused point of advancement. We will innovate faster than anything in the galaxy has ever innovated before. And the Council knows that when that happens, when humans stop thinking about survival and start thinking about victory, the entire established order will be in danger. Sarah considered this. It made perfect sense. The Galactic Council wasn't afraid of humanity's weapons. They were afraid of humanity's potential when properly motivated. They were afraid of what happened when a species had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Then, we should make sure they know we understand that, Sarah said. And that we're not the type of species to surrender our future out of fear. She turned from the window and walked back to the council table. Every eye was on her. Every person in that chamber was waiting to see what the woman who commanded Earth's military would recommend. We are going to prepare for evacuation, Sarah announced. We will mobilize resources. We will transport civilians, preserve knowledge, ensure the survival of our species. But we will do this slowly. Very slowly. As slowly as we can manage while maintaining plausible deniability to the Council. And, while they wait, while they watch, while they hold their fleets at standoff distance, we are going to give every human scientist, engineer, and researcher in this system a simple message. She paused, letting the weight of what she was about to say settle on everyone present. The message is, you have 3 weeks. Whatever you can imagine, whatever you believe is theoretically possible, whatever you've been too cautious to attempt because you were afraid of the consequences, do it. Build it. Test it. Perfect it. The entire future of the human species is about to come down to the creations of human minds and human hands. Ahmed Hassan's eyes widened. He understood what she was really asking. She was giving the Galactic Council exactly what they feared most. Not a military response. Not a traditional defense. But the unleashing of human innovation, human adaptation, human potential when properly motivated. They'll detect the activity, one of the council members warned. Of course they will, Sarah replied. That's the entire point. We want them to see what we're doing. We want them to realize that when humans are truly threatened, we don't retreat into despair. We retreat into innovation. And, by the time they understand that they've already lost, it will be far too late. The chamber was perfectly silent. Outside, Earth continued its rotation, completely unaware. And, somewhere in the vacuum of space, 3 advancing fleets received reports of activity on the colony worlds, of manufacturing facilities working at maximum capacity, of research stations coming to life in coordinated effort. The Galactic Council had asked for humanity's retreat. Instead, they were about to witness humanity's true nature. And, that, Saracen thought, was going to be the most terrifying thing any of them had ever seen. The first 7 days were absolute chaos. Not the kind of chaos that paralyzes, but the kind that clarifies. Every space facility, every orbital station, every construction yard became a hive of controlled urgency. The message had gone out, been repeated, amplified. The entire human solar system knew what was at stake. And humans, when they truly understood what they were fighting for, had a way of producing results that defied conventional probability. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood in the main laboratory of the Mars Manufacturing Complex and watched her team pull the first completed prototype through the assembly bay doors. It was beautiful in the way that only truly functional design could be beautiful. No unnecessary elements. No aesthetic choices made for the sake of appearance. Every millimeter of its surface served a purpose. Every curve and angle had been calculated 1,000 times over to achieve maximum efficiency. The Mark IV adaptive defense platform was 3 meters tall, fully autonomous, and represented everything that humans had learned about unconventional warfare in the face of superior conventional forces. But, more importantly, it represented something else entirely. It represented the exact opposite of what the Galactic Council expected from a desperate species. "Run the simulation," Yuki said. The holographic displays burst to life, showing a theoretical Valerian warcruiser encountering the platform. The simulation ran at quadruple speed. The cruiser attacked with energy weapons. The platform adapted, shifting its surface reflectivity in real time, bouncing the beam away. The cruiser switched to kinetic weapons. The platform created a localized electromagnetic field that ionized the projectiles mid-flight, converting them to harmless plasma. The cruiser attempted to maneuver for a better strike vector. The platform's navigation system tracked the movement with prescient accuracy, calculated where the cruiser would be, and positioned itself accordingly. The simulation ended with the cruiser disabled and the platform intact. Probability of success in actual combat? Yuki asked her lead engineer, Dr. James Okega. Against a single cruiser? James replied. 78%. Against multiple simultaneous attacks? Success rate decreases by roughly 15% per additional opponent up to a maximum of 4. Beyond that, the numbers become less reliable because we're working with theoretical parameters. Yuki nodded. 78% against a Valerian cruiser. That was 38% higher than the most optimistic predictions had shown before humans truly began innovating. The Galactic Council had no idea what humans had learned in the past few years. But that was only one project among hundreds. Across the entire solar system, similar breakthroughs were occurring. In the orbital shipyards above Earth, a new class of vessel was taking shape. The UES Defiant was not designed like previous human ships. It was not designed to match Valerian specifications or follow the conventions established by Council naval architects. Instead, it had been designed from first principles by humans who asked a simple question: what would Earth's greatest military minds build if they had no restrictions, no precedents to follow, no established doctrine to guide them? The answer was something unprecedented. The hull was a composite material that seemed to behave differently under different types of stress. The weapon systems were distributed throughout the vessel rather than concentrated in a few powerful batteries. The power generation was redundant beyond redundant, with 17 backup systems for every critical function. And, the AI core, the most advanced human consciousness yet created, was built with a learning architecture that would allow the ship to improve its tactics with every engagement. Captain Marcus Deschamps, who would command the Defiant when it entered active service, walked through the construction bay with his hands in his pockets and wonder in his eyes. He had trained his entire life to be a soldier, to be prepared for combat. But he had never imagined something like this. The ship seemed to embody everything he'd ever believed about human potential. Estimated combat readiness? Marcus asked the chief engineer. 3 weeks, came the reply. The AI integration is complete. We're just running final weapons systems tests now. I'll be honest, Captain. I've never worked on anything like this. The design specifications came from people who understood that you don't fight enemies in their field of expertise. You changed the rules of the game entirely. Marcus nodded. He understood. This was what human warfare looked like when it came from necessity rather than tradition. When it came from the understanding that the only way to defeat a superior force was to refuse to fight on their terms. But, while the military innovation was impressive, what was happening in the scientific community was nothing short of revolutionary. Dr. Elena Vasquez had worked on quantum mechanics for 30 years. She had spent her entire career pushing against the boundaries of what humanity understood about the universe's fundamental forces. But, like every scientist, she had worked within certain parameters. There were limits to what she attempted because there were consequences to pushing too far too fast. You published papers carefully. You built your reputation slowly. You didn't make claims you couldn't back up with peer review and established methodology. The evacuation deadline changed all of that. In the quantum laboratory in the European Space Station, Elena directed her team to attempt something that a month ago would have been considered theoretical fiction. They were trying to create a stable exotic matter construct, something that could theoretically bend spacetime in localized ways. Not to travel faster than light or cross impossible distances. Nothing so dramatic. Simply to create a shield that could deflect or absorb energy in ways that violated conventional physics. And, impossibly, it was working. The decay rate is holding steady at 0.03% per hour, announced Dr. Kenji Sato, monitoring the equipment. If we can stabilize it further, we might achieve indefinite maintenance without external energy input. Elena allowed herself a small smile. 3 weeks ago, this would have been impossible. But, 3 weeks ago, she didn't have the authorization to try. She didn't have the resources. She didn't have the understanding that the universe would give up its secrets to anyone willing to ask the hard questions without fear of the consequences. The Galactic Council had sent their demands and their fleets. What they had done instead was unlock human potential. By the 10th day, reports were streaming into the council chambers from every direction. Human scientific publications increased by 400%. Patents filed by humans for new technologies exceeded the total number filed in the entire previous century. Manufacturing capacity in human-controlled space had tripled. Military readiness was increasing exponentially. The Council's military strategists were baffled. They had seen desperate species before. They had seen species do remarkable things under pressure. But they had never seen this. They had never seen an entire civilization move with such coordinated purpose, with such clear understanding of what was at stake, with such absolute refusal to accept limitations. And that was what truly terrified them. The Valerian commander-in-chief, a being named Kreth who had personally conquered 12 different worlds, sent a message to the council expressing concern. Not fear. The Valorians did not experience fear. But concern. A recognition that something was happening on Earth that had not happened in their calculations. Human innovation was accelerating at a rate that threatened to overcome their numerical and technological advantages before they could even engage. The message was simple and direct: they are preparing something. We do not know what. But they are preparing it with the urgency of a species that believes they can win. By the 15th day, the first tests of human innovations were complete. A Mark IV platform was taken to a remote section of the asteroid belt and faced against a captured Valerian drone vessel. The drone was equivalent to a small military transport, equipped with the latest Council technology. It had weapons. It had shields. It had superior individual capabilities. The platform destroyed it in 90 seconds. When the data was analyzed by the Council's own scientists, the verdict was unambiguous: the human creation had adapted to Valerian technology faster than Council strategists believed possible. It had predicted attack patterns not through pre-programming, but through genuine predictive analysis. It had found weaknesses in established systems that should not have existed because those systems had been validated against every known form of attack for the past 500 years. It had done something that no civilization in the Council's history had ever done successfully. It had invented something fundamentally new and immediately superior. The Council's leadership descended into debate. Some called for immediate annihilation of Earth. Get the Defiant before it was completed. Destroy the research stations. Scatter the human scientific community across space. But others counseled differently. One of the Council's most respected analysts, a being of immense age and wisdom, made a simple observation. If we attack now, we attack while their weapons are still being refined. If we attack now, we attack with fleets that are equipped with the very technologies that humans are learning to overcome. If we attack now, we attack with fear in our hearts, and fear is a poor counselor in warfare. We should wait. We should give them time to complete their preparations. We should understand what they are creating. And then, when we truly know what we face, we will respond. The debate was fierce, but slowly, the argument prevailed. The fleets held position. The evacuation deadline was extended. And, in that extension, humanity gained something that no desperate species had ever possessed: time to prepare. By the 20th day, Sarah Chen stood in the Strategic Command Center and looked at the tactical displays showing human assets positioned throughout the solar system. It was not a force that could match the Galactic Council in conventional metrics. There were no human fleets large enough, no human weapons individually powerful enough, no human technology sufficient to overcome the raw numerical advantage of the Council's forces. But that had never been the goal. The goal was to show something different. Something that the Council had stopped believing was possible after 5,000 years of dominance. The goal was to show that limitation could be overcome. That innovation could outpace even established superiority. That a desperate species, given proper motivation and sufficient freedom to think unconventionally, could produce results that violated every assumption about the limits of possible advancement. Ahmed Hassan joined her at the display console. His face was lined with the stress of the past 3 weeks, but his eyes were bright. Alive. There was something in this moment that spoke to the deepest part of human nature. The part that had climbed down from trees and invented fire. The part that had crossed oceans in wooden boats. The part that had looked at the stars and decided that the vastness of space was not a reason to surrender, but a reason to reach further. The Council is expecting a response, Ahmed said quietly. They've given us permission to broadcast any message we wish. They want to know what we're planning. They want to hear humanity's final word. Sarah smiled. It was the first time she had allowed herself to smile since the evacuation demand had arrived. Then, let's give them something to think about, she said. Let's tell them that humanity has heard their request. And that our answer is no. She turned to the communications officer. Open a channel to all Council frequencies, Sarah commanded. Broadcast this message in every known language that humans have translated from Council communications. Make sure they understand every word. The message was short. It was simple. But it contained everything that humans had learned in the past 3 weeks, everything they had built, everything they believed about themselves and their future. The Galactic Council has requested that humanity abandon Earth and retreat into the darkness of space. We have considered this request carefully. And we have determined that we must respectfully decline. We will not abandon our world. We will not diminish our potential. We will not choose safety over identity. Instead, we offer the Council the same courtesy they offered us. We ask that you witness what humanity becomes when we are truly motivated. We ask that you observe what happens when a species decides to compete rather than comply. And we ask that you understand this fundamental truth about human nature: we do not retreat. We advance. We innovate. We overcome. If you wish to test yourselves against humanity, we welcome that test. If you wish to know what we are capable of, prepare yourself for the answer. Because humanity has always defined itself not by the limitations others place on us, but by the possibilities we find within ourselves. The message went out across space. And, on 1,000 different council worlds, beings who had grown comfortable in their dominance received a transmission that fundamentally altered their understanding of what was possible. Humanity had not begged for mercy. Humanity had not asked for exceptions or special treatment. Humanity had looked into the face of overwhelming force and said, not we surrender, but we innovate. And, for the first time in 5,000 years, the Galactic Council felt something that fear alone could not describe. They felt the possibility of something truly novel entering the universe. The possibility that the rules they had written might be rewritten by someone else. The possibility that humans, this impossibly young species, might be the beginning of the end of their dominance. The evacuation deadline passed silently. No order was given to evacuate. No ultimatum was issued. Instead, there was simply the growing realization that humanity had already decided its future. They had decided to stay. They had decided to fight. They had decided to become something new. The Valerian fleets moved inward. Not in aggression, not yet. But, in deliberate advance, as if to say, we have observed your preparation, and we are ready to understand what you believe you have created. They maintained their distance, 3 million kilometers from Earth's orbit, far enough to observe without committing, close enough to make their presence undeniable. It was a posture that suggested confidence and calculation in equal measure. Sarah Chen had not slept in 37 hours. She sat in the command center on the UES Prometheus and watched the fleet positions update in real time. Around her, her officers maintained their stations with the focused calm that came only from training and absolute conviction in their purpose. They had drilled for this moment for thousands of hours. They had studied every known Valerian tactic, every documented encounter, every scrap of military theory that could be applied to unconventional warfare. But, as Sarah watched the Valerian fleet, she understood something that pure military calculation could never quantify. The Valorians were afraid. Not of her weapons. Not of her platforms or her ships or her defensive installations. They were afraid of something more fundamental. They were afraid of the unknown. And that fear was perhaps the greatest advantage humanity possessed. The communication channel opened without warning. The message came directly from the Valerian command vessel, encoded in the universal trade language that the Galactic Council had established centuries ago. The voice that came through was calm and measured, carrying the weight of absolute authority. I am Commander Kreth of the Valerian Ascendant. I have come to understand what humanity believes it has become. I propose a demonstration. A single confrontation, isolated from your population centers. You will send your finest creation. We will send our finest weapon. The victor will determine the terms by which we proceed. It was a challenge. Direct and unambiguous. Sarah looked at Ahmed Hassan, who had joined her in the command center. His expression was unreadable. But, when he met her eyes, she understood that he had already anticipated this possibility. The council operated on principles of honor and trial. They would never simply attack without first testing themselves against human innovation. And that was exactly the opening that humanity needed. Accept, Sarah said. Send the UES Defiant. It's ready. The challenge took place in a region of space where no major installations existed, far enough from Earth that any catastrophic outcome would not threaten the planet, but close enough that every human sensor array could observe every detail. The rules were simple: both vessels would enter the engagement zone. Neither would attempt to flee. They would engage until one could no longer function. Captain Marcus Deschamps took command of the Defiant and personally guided the vessel toward the designated confrontation point. As he entered the zone, he found himself thinking of history. Of every naval battle that had ever mattered. Of every moment when human courage and innovation had faced down overwhelming odds. Of every time humanity had refused to surrender to the inevitable. The Valerian vessel emerged from the darkness like something carved from shadow itself. It was sleek and terrible, a warship that had conquered a dozen worlds and ended 100 conflicts without ever breaking a sweat. Its weapons systems alone represented technology that was 1,000 years advanced beyond human understanding. And it was beautiful in the way that absolute perfection is always beautiful. For a moment, nothing happened. The two vessels faced each other across 1,000,000 kilometers of void. Predator and prey, or so the Valorians certainly believed. Initiating engagement, Marcus commanded. The Defiant moved first, but not to attack. It moved to escape. The human warship accelerated hard, maximum thrust, its engines pushing the vessel to speeds that should have torn it apart from internal stress. The Valerian cruiser gave chase, its superior engines making up the distance easily. It fired its primary weapons. Energy lances crossed the space between them, strikes of such intensity that they left trails of ionized particles hanging in their wake. The Defiant's shields, powered by the exotic matter technology that humans had barely stabilized, held. The shields warped around the attacks, converting the energy into something harmless, spreading it across a wider surface area than any conventional shield could have managed. Then, the shields adapted. They shifted, changed configuration, anticipated the next strike even before the Valerian vessel could adjust its targeting. This was the true advantage of human innovation. Not superior weapons. Not stronger shields. But the ability to learn and adapt in real time, to think unconventionally, to use physics itself as a tool rather than a constraint. The pursuit became a dance of escalating actions and reactions. The Valerian cruiser tried conventional tactics. The Defiant responded with unconventional deflection. The cruiser switched to kinetic weapons. The Defiant adapted its shields to create magnetic fields that disrupted projectile trajectories. The cruiser attempted to maneuver into a more advantageous position. The Defiant's AI, learning from every second of engagement, predicted the movement and shifted position with prescient accuracy. And then, after 12 minutes of continuous engagement, the Defiant ceased running. It turned hard, its engines pushing to maximum, and faced the Valerian vessel directly. Marcus Deshawn had a choice to make. He could continue the defensive engagement. He could maintain the advantage of adaptation and prediction. He could wait for the Valerian weapons systems to exhaust their capabilities against human shields that seemed to have no upper limit. But that was not what he chose. All weapons, fire, he commanded. The Defiant unleashed everything it had. Not the conventional energy weapons that the Valorians expected. But something entirely new. Singular point mass projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds by human engineers who understood that if you're going to fight something impossible, you don't use their weapons. You invent new ones. These projectiles could not be stopped by energy shields. They could not be destroyed by point defense systems. They were too fast, too small, too numerous. The first volley struck the Valerian vessel with impacts that registered at frequencies that should have been impossible to generate. The cruiser's shields flickered and collapsed. Its armor, tested against 1,000 different threats, had no defense against something that it had never encountered. Holes opened in its hull. Systems failed in cascading failures. For the first time in its combat history, the Valerian warship was dying. But Marcus did not finish it. As the Defiant's weapons fell silent, the crippled Valerian vessel hung motionless in space, intact enough to survive, crippled enough to know that it had lost. The message that came back from the Valerian command vessel was different. There was no anger in it, no shame. But there was something else. Something like recognition. And respect. We acknowledge your victory. We acknowledge that you have created something unprecedented. You have done what the Council believed was impossible. You have invented something that violates our understanding of warfare itself. But Sarah had expected that message. What she was truly waiting for was what came next. However, the Valerian commander continued, I must confess a truth that our delegation did not include in our original assessment. The Council did not send us to conquer Earth. We came to assess whether humanity posed a sufficient threat that you should be eliminated entirely. Our conclusion, however, is changing. The threat you pose is not to our military superiority. It is to something far more fundamental. The pause that followed seemed to stretch across the entire solar system. You pose a threat to our certainty. For 5,000 years, the Galactic Council has operated under the assumption that progress has limits. That technological advancement follows predictable curves. That any species, given sufficient time and resources, will eventually understand all the principles by which the universe operates. Your race has disproven this assumption in merely a few weeks. You have created systems that we did not believe were possible. You have innovated in ways that suggest that the universe itself reserves secrets for those willing to break their own paradigms to discover them. Sarah understood then what the Council truly feared. It was not that humans could defeat them militarily. It was that humans represented something that threatened the entire foundation of their civilization. They represented the possibility of endless advancement. The possibility that limits were not physical constraints but mental ones. The possibility that the future belonged not to those who had conquered the present, but to those who could continuously reinvent themselves. What are you proposing? Sarah asked directly. The response came slowly, as if each word was being chosen with immense deliberation. The Council is prepared to make you an offer different from evacuation. We propose partnership. Not subordination. Not the traditional client relationship that we maintain with other species. But genuine alliance. We will share technologies that have been restricted. We will grant access to the repositories of knowledge that most civilizations would never see. We will work with humanity not as your superior, but as your equal. And, in exchange, we ask only this: continue to innovate. Continue to push the boundaries of what is possible. Continue to be what you have already proven you are capable of being. It was an extraordinary proposal. It was essentially the Council admitting that they were frightened of their own stagnation, that they wanted humanity's revolutionary spirit to refresh their own calcified civilization. Sarah turned to Ahmed Hassan. His eyes were bright with the understanding of what this meant. It meant survival. It meant humanity's place not in the shadows of the galaxy, but in its light. It meant that the future would be written not by those who had already won, but by those who could not stop reaching. Tell them yes, Sarah said. But tell them something else as well. Tell them that this changes nothing about who we are. We will not accept this offer because we are afraid of being conquered. We will accept it because humanity has always been driven by the same fundamental force that led us across oceans and into space. Curiosity. We want to know what's possible. We want to understand. We want to be more than we are. That's not a military advantage. That's not a negotiating position. That's simply what it means to be human. The message was sent. And, across the galaxy, from world to world to world, the Galactic Council processed what had happened. A young species. Barely sapient by the Council's reckoning. Lacking the resources, the knowledge, the established infrastructure of civilizations 10,000 years old. Had not merely defended themselves. They had innovated themselves into a position of strength so complete that their former would-be conquerors were forced to admit that they had been wrong about the fundamental nature of progress itself. In the weeks that followed, as delegations from the Galactic Council arrived at Earth's orbital stations, as the first human scientists were granted access to vast repositories of alien knowledge, as the first genuine partnerships between human and Council technology began to form, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus and looked down at Earth once more. She thought about her daughter, Chenwei, somewhere on that blue marble, completely unaware that the world had nearly been evacuated. Completely unaware that her entire civilization had stood on the edge of annihilation. Unaware that the reason she would never have to be evacuated, the reason humanity had secured its future, was not because they were stronger or more advanced, but because they refused to surrender to limitations. Because they asked questions that others considered settled. Because they looked at the impossible and said, "Show me why," rather than "Prove that I can't." That was human. That was what had kept the species advancing for 3 million years through every hardship, every disaster, every moment of despair. Not survival instinct. Not superiority. But the simple, fundamental refusal to accept that the universe had decided humanity's future for them. Ahmed Hassan joined her at the window, as he had so many times before. "Your daughter wants to know why you spent so much time in space," he said. "She asked me about you, back in Hong Kong. Wanted to know if you'd save the world." Sarah smiled. "Did you tell her yes?" "No," Ahmed replied. "I told her that her mother refused to let the world be taken away." "There's a difference." Sarah nodded. There was indeed a difference. Saving something implied that it could have been lost. But what Sarah had done, what humanity had done, was something grander. They had demonstrated that humanity was never a species that could be saved or lost. They were a species that would always exist in the act of becoming something more. Far above Earth, the Defiant hung in space, scarred and battered from its confrontation with the Valerian cruiser, but whole. Intact. Victorious. And, around it, council vessels that had come to study human innovation, to learn what it meant to dream without limits, to understand what happened when a species refused to believe in the inevitability of stagnation. The evacuation had been called off. But, more importantly, the debate about humanity's future had been reframed entirely. They were no longer refugees. They were no longer a desperate species facing annihilation. They were what they had always been underneath the fear and doubt, a civilization that refused to surrender to anything except their own potential. And, as Earth continued its rotation, as 3 billion humans went about their lives completely unaware of how close they had come to losing everything, Sarah Chen understood the deepest truth about her species. Humanity had never retreated from Earth. Humanity had advanced from it. And nothing in the galaxy could stop that advancement now.